Hello, and welcome to yet another video here moving into a new unit. Today, what we're going to be discussing is natural selection and evolution, or the survival of the fittest and how organisms can adapt and change over time. Let's go ahead and get started. The first question is, what is evolution? Well, simply put, evolution is just the changes in living organisms over a set amount of time. And this explains how modern organisms have descended from more ancient organisms. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of species alive today that have changed over time. Not all of us look the same as we used to back in the day. So to understand evolution, specifically the process of natural selection, we have to understand the concept of fitness and adaptation. Now, we don't mean fitness in a traditional sense, as in how quickly you can run, or how much you can bench, or how many push-ups you can do. We're talking about the basic premise here is that organisms have to compete for a limited number of resources, and some organisms are going to be better at that level of competition than others. This is what we call fitness. So fitness is the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce in its environment. An adaptation, however, is any inherited characteristic that can increase an organism's chance of survival. Now, once again, this can also include reproduction. So an adaptation can increase an organism's fitness, but a fitness is how well it's able to survive in its environment. So what exactly determines if an organism can survive or not? Well, organisms need traits that help them survive. Specifically, we're talking about keeping the organism alive. And that can be surviving predators, surviving disease, competing for food, or competing for territory. If an organism has an edge in any of these categories, it's going to help them survive. Also, traits that help individuals reproduce. These can go ahead and be anything like helping them attract a mate, competing for nesting sites, or successfully raising their young, keeping them alive to the point where the young can then reproduce. So both of these are important for an organism's survival. The process of natural selection. There are four major steps for natural selection to take place. Now, natural selection being survival of the fittest. And now that we know what fitness actually means, this kind of makes a bit more sense. Step number one, there has to be variation in a specific trait. In this case, we're looking at beetles. Now, some beetles are green and some are brown. So I want you to use your imagination here for a moment. Let's consider potentially that these organisms live in a sandy desert-like area. Which of the two do you think are going to be better at hiding? Well, let's keep that in mind. Step number two, there is differential reproduction. Now, since the environment can't support an unlimited amount of population growth, not all individuals are going to get to reproduce to their fullest potential. Either they can't find a mate, or in this case, they're being picked off and eaten. So in this case, like we said, we're in a desert environment. Here, the green beetles tend to get eaten by birds because they kind of stick out like a sore thumb. So, considering that the number of green beetles are being eaten, they're going to survive less and reproduce less often than the brown beetles do. Let's continue. Step number three, there has to be heredity. So, considering that surviving brown beetles have been living to the point where they can reproduce, they begin having brown beetle babies. Try saying that 3 times fast. So, the trait for brown coloration tends to become a bit more common in the population because these organisms that have that are surviving and reproducing. The end result is what we call natural selection. The more advantageous trait, in this case brown coloration, which allows the beetles to have more offspring, becomes more common in the population. If this process continues, eventually all individuals in the population will have brown coloring. So it was the best adaptation to increase the level of fitness in the population overall. Now, over time, natural selection results in changes in the inherited characteristics of a population. So natural selection and evolution are not a one-person thing. It has to occur over generations and affect an entire population. And the main goal is to go ahead and increase the species' fitness in its environment. So evolution occurs on a grand scale, not on an individual basis. Finally, There are 5 conditions that are needed for evolution to occur. If these 5 conditions are not met, evolution is not going to happen. There has to be gene flow, so the movement of genes from one population to another. So think about migration, organisms coming into a specific area or organisms leaving. Mutations, any change in the genetic code. Mutations can also cause different traits to appear. So some mutations can affect an organism's fitness while others can have no effect at all. Genetic drift. So genetic drift, we just mean that there's a random change in gene frequencies. So it might not be the best trait for the job, but by sheer chance, it just happens to be the most prevalent. Non-random mating. So sexual selection. Mates choose each other. Like we said, organisms that have a better chance of reproducing are organisms that have traits that the other members of the species find a bit more valuable. So organisms choose who they mate with. And finally, after all that, natural selection will take place. So natural selection, remember, is selecting the traits that will help the overall fitness of the species increase. So with that, that's going to go ahead and close up shop for the introduction to natural selection and evolution. If you have any questions, make sure to go ahead and contact your instructor. They'll point you on the right path. So until next time, you go ahead, take care of yourself, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.